From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The situation is now more obvious that Walon and Kyaso O were arrested because of their investigative report on the Indin massacre. Journalists have the right to access the news according to journalistic ethics. This incident is an abuse of justice. This is also evidence that the media are being intimidated in Burma.
Reuters news agency has published an explosive report on a Burmese military massacre of Rohingya Muslims. The two journalists who uncovered the killings have been locked up in a Burmese prison for the past 2 months. We'll speak to the Reuters bureau chief in Burma, then to Capitol Hill.
A budget should reflect our moral priorities, but this budget only demonstrates that Trump is committed to lining the pockets of his wealthy friends. We need a budget that is based on equity and compassion, a budget that puts working families first. And that's the kind of budget that I intend to fight for.
We'll speak with Seattle Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal as President Trump proposes deep cuts to education, healthcare, and social safety net programs while massively increasing the Pentagon's budget. Finally, we mark the 20th anniversary of V-Day, the global movement to stop violence against women and girls. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House is embroiled in even more controversy over former Staff Secretary Rob Porter after FBI Director Christopher Wray testified to the Senate that the FBI told the White House about the physical and verbal abuse allegations that were holding up Porter's background check months earlier than the White House has admitted.
The FBI submitted a partial report on the investigation in question in March, and then a completed background investigation in late July. That is soon thereafter, we received requests for follow-up inquiry, and we did the follow-up and provided that information in November, and then we administratively closed the file in January.
That was FBI Director Christopher Wray. Porter resigned after both of his ex-wives accused him of verbal and physical abuse, and photos were released showing Porter's first wife, Colby Holderness, with a black eye, which she said she suffered after he punched her in the face. The FBI director's testimony further exposes how Trump administration officials allowed Porter to continue working in the White House despite the serious accusations of domestic violence. In fact, CNN reports White House officials were considering promoting Porter to Deputy Chief of Staff under General Kelly before the photos were released. President Trump has repeatedly defended Porter, emphasizing Porter claims he's innocent. Trump himself has been accused of sexual harassment or assault by at least 16 women. A second federal judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration from canceling DACA, the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which gives some 800,000 young undocumented immigrants permission to live and work in the United States. On Tuesday, Judge Nicholas Garofis in New York issued an injunction to temporarily keep the program in place, warning its cancellation would have profound and irreversible social costs, writing, quote, "It's impossible to understand the full consequences of a decision of this magnitude," unquote. This comes as lawmakers on Capitol Hill are continuing to debate the future of DACA. Republican lawmakers are pushing to include an amendment to punish so-called sanctuary cities as part of any immigration legislation to protect dreamers. In more news on immigration, activists and civil liberties advocates are issuing warnings over reports that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, is seeking to become an intelligence agency. Critics say the move would give ICE access to an array of raw intelligence data that could lead to further abuses as ICE carries out President Trump's mass deportation efforts. This is Jack LaPeroux of the independent watchdog agency, the Project on Government Oversight.
Well, I think if we've seen in the last year ICE demonstrate a willingness to be more severe and more arbitrary in its arrests, deportations, and actions, this would enable them to a much higher degree. It's really like taking someone who you're not comfortable giving a kitchen knife to and handing them a grenade.
Meanwhile, the chief counsel for ICE in Seattle has been charged with stealing the identities of 7 immigrants in order to defraud credit card companies. Rafael Sanchez has resigned from the agency amidst the charges and faces 1 count of aggravated identity theft and another of wire fraud. This comes as President Trump's longtime personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, says he personally paid $130,000 to former porn star Stephanie Clifford, better known as Stormy Daniels, several weeks before Trump's election to keep her from going public about her 2006 sexual encounter with Donald Trump. Cohen says he was never reimbursed for the payment to silence Daniels. U.S. intelligence officials claimed Tuesday Russia's likely planning to meddle in the U.S. 2018 midterm elections. This is U.S. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates.
Social media, false flag personas, sympathetic spokesmen, and other means to influence to try to build on its wide range of operations and exacerbate social and political fissures in the United States. There should be no doubt that Russia perceived that its past efforts as successful and views the 2018 U.S. midterm elections as a potential target for Russian influence operations.
The intelligence community's warnings during Tuesday's Senate Intelligence Committee hearings contradict President Trump, who's repeatedly cast doubt on whether Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election. This is separate from Trump currently under investigation for allegedly colluding with Russia ahead of the presidential election. The United States is refusing to commit any direct money for reconstruction in Iraq after the U.S.-led coalition bombing campaign against ISIS militants destroyed homes, schools, hospitals, critical infrastructure across wide swaths of Iraq. The United Nations says 40,000 homes were destroyed in Mosul alone. At an international conference in Kuwait this week, the Iraqi government has asked for $88 billion to rebuild. So far, other countries have pledged only a combined $4 billion. The United States has offered a $3 billion loan. This comes after the U.S. Senate reached a 2018 budget deal that includes $700 billion for the military in the United States. In Israel, the justice minister has sparked outrage by saying maintaining a Jewish majority in Israel justifies committing human rights violations. Speaking at a conference on Monday in Tel Aviv, Ayelet Shaked said, quote, "There is place to maintain a Jewish majority even at the price of violation of rights," unquote. During her speech, Shaked also defended the controversial so-called Jewish nation state bill, which would legally define Israel as the national home of the Jewish people. Critics say if passed, the bill could be used to justify the widespread discrimination against Israel's non-Jewish citizens. In more news on Israel, the police have recommended indicting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on criminal corruption charges. Netanyahu is under investigation in 2 separate criminal corruption cases. In one case, he's accused of trying to push tax breaks to benefit an Israeli billionaire Hollywood producer after receiving gifts from him. In the second case, Netanyahu is accused of trying to strike a deal to secure more favorable coverage from a leading Israeli newspaper by offering to curtail the circulation of one of the newspaper's rivals. The group PEN America has announced it'll honor 2 imprisoned Reuters journalists, Wallon and Kya Soe, with this year's Freedom to Write Award. The 2 have been jailed in Burma after investigating a massacre committed by the Burmese military against Rohingya Muslims in the village of Indin in northern Burma. They appeared in court earlier today in Burma after having been charged with violating Burma's Official Secrets Act. Later in the broadcast, we'll go to Burma for more. In Ethiopia, a senior Oromo opposition leader has been released from prison after protesters staged widespread demonstrations Monday to demand his freedom. Bekele Gerba is the Secretary General of the Oromo Federalist Congress. He was arrested in 2015 amidst an uprising in Oromia over efforts to displace them from their land. After being released, Gerba called for the release of other Oromo political prisoners.
There are still thousands and thousands of people languishing in jail, so our release alone should not be considered as the release of all the Oromo from prisons, and you should not stop your struggle. Our struggle should not stop as long as there is a single Oromo remaining in the prison.
Again upheld an arrest warrant for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Assange's lawyers have been trying to argue the British arrest warrant for jumping bail should be rescinded because it's contrary to the public interest and because it's related to a Swedish sexual assault investigation against Assange, which has since been dropped. Tuesday's ruling comes after 1 week ago the same British judge, Emma Arbuthnot, ruled for the first time to not drop Assange's arrest warrant. Back in the United States, the Council on American Islamic Relations, known as CAIR, is suing Southwest Airlines on behalf of a recent University of California, Berkeley graduate who was removed from a Southwest plane in April 2016 and prohibited from reboarding after a fellow traveler complained about him speaking Arabic. Khairuddin Makhzoumi was talking to his uncle on a cell phone as he was boarding the flight when a fellow passenger claimed he was using words related to an attack. In fact, he was using the word inshallah, which means God willing, and is one of the most commonly used words in the Arabic language. And American Olympian Shaun White faced questioning about accusations of sexual harassment after he won yet another Olympic gold medal for the men's snowboard halfpipe at this year's Olympic Games in South Korea. White's been sued for sexually harassing his former bandmate, Lena Zuida, and then firing her without paying her after she rebuked his behavior. At a news conference today in which female journalists say the Olympic Committee officials only called on male journalists, Shaun White tried to claim the lawsuit and accusations were gossip.
You know, honestly, here to talk about the Olympics, not, gossip. So, but I don't think so. I am who I am, and I'm proud of who I am, and my friends, love me and vouch for me, and I think that stands on its own. So,
absolutely.
But so you're saying that the allegations against you are gossip?
I think we're here to talk about the gold medal and the amazing day we had today. Thank you. So if we don't have another question, why don't we go ahead and just pass the mic? Thank you so much.
I'd like it to be addressed just a little bit. I mean,
like I said, I think we're here to talk about the gold medal today and the amazing day we just had.
I feel like I addressed it.
Shaun White reached a private settlement with Zuida months ago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Burma, where 2 journalists from the Reuters news agency have entered their 3rd month in jail. Hua Lon and Kyaw Soe were arrested December 12th and charged with violating Burma's Official Secrets Act. They've been denied bail and face up to 14 years in jail. At the time of the arrest, they were investigating a massacre committed by the Burmese military targeting Rohingya Muslims in the village of Indin in September. While the 2 journalists remain in prison, other journalists with Reuters have continued to piece together what happened in Indin. In a shocking new expose, Reuters reports Burmese soldiers and members of an informal militia executed 10 Rohingya Muslim captives. At least 2 of the men were hacked to death. The others were shot. Reuters published one photo showing the 10 men lined up in a row on the day of their execution. The 10 men are kneeling on the ground with their hands tied behind their backs. A second photo shows the men's bloodied bodies buried in a single grave. The dead included 2 high school students, fishermen, shopkeepers, and an Islamic teacher. The killings were part of what the United Nations has described as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Since last year, at least 6,700 Rohingya Muslims have been killed in Burma. Entire villages have been destroyed. About 700,000 Rohingya have fled across the border into Bangladesh. The jailing of the Burmese journalists has sparked international outrage. On Tuesday, the group PEN America announced it'll honor Hua Lon and Kyaw Soe with this year's Freedom to Write Award. On Sunday, fellow journalists in Burma took part in a protest. This is Saleh Tantzin of the publication The Irrawaddy.
The situation is now more obvious that Hua Lon and Kyaw Soe were arrested because of their investigative report on the Indin massacre. Journalists have the right to access the news according to journalistic ethics. This incident is an abuse of justice. This is also evidence that the media are being intimidated in Burma.
Earlier today, the imprisoned Reuters reporters, Hua Lon and Kyaw Soe, appeared in a Burmese court. As Lon left the court, he said, quote, "I can tell you we worked in accordance with media ethics. I totally believe that." We go now to Singapore to speak with Anthony Slotkovsky, Reuters bureau chief in Burma. He worked closely with Wallon and Kyaw Soe and co-wrote Reuters' new special report. Anthony, welcome to Democracy Now! We have a number of issues to discuss. The two Burmese reporters, your colleagues, have just been in a Burmese court. They face 14 years in jail. And you've just released this explosive expose that they and you were working on. Can you talk about what happened in Indin and why then these two reporters were arrested?
Right. So I think this story that Wallon and Kyaw Soe worked on is it's really important for sort of three main reasons. First of all, it's this painstaking, detailed account of the execution of these 10 men who were apparently picked at random by the security forces, held overnight at school, and then the following day they were executed. As you said in your material before I came on air, they were shopkeepers, they were fishermen, two of them were students, and we also were able to meet their families in Bangladesh, who have since fled to Bangladesh, and who told us about them and recognized them on these dramatic pictures before the execution. But apart from this incredibly detailed reconstruction of that execution, what's really striking in what Wallon and Kyaw Soe uncovered in northern Rakhine is also not just the depth, but also the breadth of their reporting. So the story is actually not only limited to Indin; it also goes beyond and discusses the dynamics, the mechanics of this military operation across a wider area. There was reporting from villages several miles to the north of Indin, where we're also hearing about very similar accounts of how the security forces and the Rakhine Buddhist villagers carried out burnings or of the Rohingya homes, etc. And I think the third really important thing is that these accounts are for the first time coming from the people who carried out those acts themselves. So we have insider accounts from police officers describing how they actually went about raiding those villages. We also have accounts from Rakhine Buddhists, and not just one or two, but many thereof. So I think those are really like the three key points that really tie this story together, and perhaps and this is sort of what Wallon and Kyaw Soe were working on, and we're very proud of their reporting, and I know from the hearing in Yangon today that they were very happy with the impact that the story has had so far.
So can you talk about the day they were picked up, Anthony, December 12th, what they were doing? In line with you talking about the particular significance of this report is that this was a report based on admissions by the killers in this massacre.
Right. So Wallon and Kyaw Soe were meeting two police officers they'd never met before for dinner, as reporters around the world do. What we do is we meet people, we discuss things with them, and they were handed over some documents that they never even had a chance to look at. They were told, look at them when you get back home. But before they were able to get back home, immediately after leaving the restaurant, they were apprehended. They were arrested by the police. Wallon was able to send me a text message saying, I have been arrested. we spent the whole night trying to find out more information about them, going from one police station to another, trying to establish their whereabouts. Only several hours later, Myanmar's authorities released a statement saying that they have been arrested. But even from that point, for about 2 weeks, they were held without access to lawyers and families, and then eventually emerged at a court hearing, like I said, pretty much 2 weeks after they were arrested.
Let's turn to your imprisoned colleague, Wallon. He briefly spoke to reporters earlier this month as police led him away in handcuffs from a courtroom.
The police told us to sign a document about our arrests when we were detained. They said they will add more charges unless we sign the document.
So then we see the military putting him in a car and taking him away. Earlier this month, the Office of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the journalist's release, citing the erosion of press freedom in Burma. On Tuesday, Deputy UN Political Affairs Chief Miroslav Jenka reiterated calls for the journalist to be released.
Let me address the unfortunate arrest of 2 Reuters journalists, Wallon and Cho Soe-o. The Secretary General has called in clear terms for the release of the journalists and urged the authorities to respect the right to freedom of expression and information. Allow me to reiterate those calls here today. The ability to exercise the right to freedom of expression and information is a barometer for respect for human rights more broadly. Reuters has now published the story these journalists were working on, a deeply disturbing account of the execution of 10 Rohingya men in Indian village, Mongdo, in northern Rakhine State. The Associated Press has also published a report of 5 mass graves in Gudarpin village in Butidong. These and other shocking reports of grave abuses demand our attention and action for the sake of lasting peace and justice.
And now I want to turn to Burma's ambassador to the United Nations, Haldu Swan, speaking just Tuesday.
Mr. President, the case of 2 Reuters reporters has attracted much attention in recent weeks. Myanmar recognizes freedom of press, and they were not arrested for reporting. The 2 reporters are charged under Official Secret Act for illegally possessing confidential government documents. Every citizen is bound by the existing law of the land. It is important that the action of a journalist must also be within the bound of the law. In accordance with the judicial procedure, they have full legal rights as defendants in the course of legal proceedings.
So that's Burma's ambassador to the UN, Anthony Sladkovsky. Can you respond to what he's saying?
As we have published in our in the special report, the investigation that they were carrying out is what prompted their arrest. And I may just say that, in addition, and I wouldn't want to sort of directly respond, but I'll just say that we believe that.
We may have just lost that feed to Singapore, though I think we're going to get him back. We're talking to Anthony Sladkovsky, who is the Reuters bureau chief in Burma. He co-wrote the special report with the 2 imprisoned reporters. They were imprisoned December 12th. Let's see if he can hear us. Anthony, you were just responding to the allegation that the Burmese ambassador to the UN said.
Right. So, like I said before, I think that well, first of all, the story I hope shows to the whole world and also the Myanmar public that these 2 individuals were not some suspicious people doing something strange or I don't know. Indeed, they were journalists working incredibly hard on a very important story of, a story of global importance, and then they are not just any journalists, but journalists of, of the highest order, and we believe that they have done nothing wrong, and we're confident that the legal proceedings will show that.
And I just want to clarify for listeners, viewers, readers, when we use these words Burma and Myanmar, the same country. Myanmar was the name that the military regime gave to Burma, the capital, Rangoon. They renamed Yangon. Anthony Sladkovsky is the Reuters bureau chief in Burma, but we're speaking to him right now in Singapore. Now, the issue of Aung San Suu Kyi, known around the world as the Nobel Peace Laureate, who herself was imprisoned for years. What role has she played in this? She's the de facto leader, even if she doesn't have the formal title of president of Burma. She's been criticized. Many have said her Nobel Peace Prize should be revoked. Can you talk about the significance of what she is and is not saying, Anthony?
Right. So I think the ambassador, Myanmar's ambassador to the UN, is obviously he works for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is run by Aung San Suu Kyi, who has several different roles, and one of them is the role of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So I believe that he was speaking on behalf of the government, and I'll just leave it at that. But I think more broadly, we hope we as journalists at Reuters are in Myanmar to report the facts and report on the events of global importance. And this story that Wallon and Choso worked on and published contributes to our understanding and to the understanding of everybody in Myanmar, including, I hope, State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, of indeed what transpired in northern Rakhine. It's the most comprehensive, most detailed account to date, and for the first time we're hearing from several Rakhine Buddhists, members of the security forces, describing in great detail the burnings, the lootings, and also that the dramatic execution in early September last year.
On Sunday, Britain's Foreign Minister Boris Johnson met with displaced Rohingya Muslims hours after meeting with Burma's de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Johnson later told reporters he's not sure whether Suu Kyi, quote, really understands the full horror of what has happened.
Yes, the difficulty is that, to be honest, I'm not sure she really understands the full horror of what has happened up here. I don't think she's been up in a helicopter to see what we have seen today. And really what I was trying to get over to her is the importance of her leadership. I believe in her, and I believe in her leadership. I think she's done incredible things in her life. I'm very sad to see what's happening to Burma now and to see the direction the country is going. I believe she can still make a change and make a difference, but to do that, she needs to show a lead, get the agencies in, get the refugees back home in a way that is safe and voluntary and dignified.
So let's wrap up, Anthony Sladkovsky. Your colleagues have just been in court just hours ago. They face 14 years in jail for exposing this latest report. You decided to talk about your decision to release this report as they were in jail. They weren't arrested before the report came out. And the effect that this massacre in September in Indin had on the Rohingya population, more than 500,000 of whom have fled to neighboring Bangladesh.
Right. So when Wallon and Choso were first arrested, we focused all our efforts and all our energy on making sure that they are safe. and safety is sort of paramount importance for Reuters, and the safety of our staff both in Myanmar and around the world. After we were able to clarify their legal situation, we decided that this is our duty and obligation to the global public and the public in Myanmar to go ahead and publish this groundbreaking investigation. And Wallon and Cho So-u both very strongly supported that decision. In the end, we're all journalists, and this is what we do. And then in terms of the impact that this massacre had on the Rohingya population, well, this is what we were able to report on under incredibly difficult circumstances. Let's not forget that access to northern Rakhine state and that part of Myanmar is curtailed de facto by the security forces, and it's not easy to go there and to be able to report on it independently and to speak to all the stakeholders without consequences. So what we've seen at the United Nations Security Council meeting yesterday was that a lot of observers and a lot of diplomats have underscored that this report, as well as other reports that have come out recently, highlight the need for sort of a thorough and independent investigation into those allegations that are being raised around the world, according to those diplomats present at that Security Council meeting yesterday.
Anthony Slatkovsky, we thank you for being with us, Reuters bureau chief in Burma and Myanmar. He co-wrote the special report on the massacre in Indin in northern Burma. On Tuesday, the group PEN America announced it'll honor his imprisoned colleagues, Kyaw Soe-u and Wallon, with this year's Freedom to Write Award, which will be awarded next Tuesday. The two have been jailed in Burma after investigating the massacre committed by the Burmese military against Rohingya Muslims in the village of Indin. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the budget-busting budget in Washington, D.C. We'll speak with a Congress member about what it means for the American population. Stay with us and others. Mad Lib's movie finale here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to President Trump's $4.4 trillion budget plan unveiled this week. The plan proposes deep cuts to education, healthcare, social safety net programs while massively increasing the Pentagon's budget. Trump's plan would slash the Department of Education's budget by more than 10%. It would sharply reduce income-based student loan repayment plans while ending the public service loan forgiveness program. Trump's budget would cut more than $17 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, barring food stamp recipients from buying fresh fruit and vegetables and instead providing only a boxed food delivery program. The budget would also phase out federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports public and community radio and TV stations. This comes as McClatchy reports the Trump administration is considering a plan that would not only impose work requirements on Medicaid enrollees, but which would also put a lifetime limit on adults' access to Medicaid. Meanwhile, Trump's budget would see a 13% rise in spending on weapons and war, bringing the Pentagon's budget to $686 billion. The administration says its plan would add $7.1 trillion to U.S. budget deficits over the next decade, though many economists say that number relies on rosy projections. The budget comes less than 2 months after Trump signed into law one of the largest tax cuts in U.S. history, one that overwhelmingly favors the wealthiest Americans. On Tuesday, Senator Bernie Sanders questioned Budget Director Mick Mulvaney.
Explain to me the morality of a process by which we give the third wealthiest family in America, a major contributor, I might add, to the Republican Party, over $1 billion a year in tax breaks, and yet we cut a program which keeps children and the elderly warm in the winter.
Here's the morality of the Leahy proposal, Senator. 11,000 dead people got that benefit the last time the GAO looked at it. That's not moral. To take your money, to take my money, to take the money from the people that—
11,000 people got it who shouldn't have. Correct that. But 7 million people get the program. To say that 11,000 out of 7 million, deal with that.
Well, to talk more about the budget, we go now to Capitol Hill to speak with Pramila Jayapal, the Democratic Congressmember representing Washington State 7th District, vice-ranking member of the House Budget Committee, formerly served in the Washington State Senate. In 2001, she founded Hate Free Zone, now called One America, Washington State's largest immigrant rights organization. Congressmember Jayapal, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you respond to President Trump's budget?
Well, this is, I call it the three strikes you're out budget for working people and the poor and the elderly and the sick and the disabled. Because strike one was, to actually transfer $1.3 trillion in wealth from working people and the poor to the wealthiest through the GOP tax scam. And to their credit, they are finally saying in this budget that actually those GOP tax cuts don't pay for themselves because they're projecting these enormous deficits as a result of the tax cuts. Strike two is that they're essentially going to balloon the deficit, and as you said, $7 trillion over 10 years, $1 trillion next year alone. And strike three is cutting every program that allows people to live with any shred of dignity, any shred of hope, any shred of opportunity. And just as an example, let's just look at SNAP. This is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. They are proposing a $213 billion cut to SNAP. They're proposing that people have to work in order to get these benefits. And remember that 3/4 of all the SNAP recipients are the elderly, the disabled, and families with children. And the average per person per meal benefit that people get on SNAP is $1.40. So this budget, to me, is a budget is supposed to be a statement of moral principles. This is a statement of immoral principles because it literally is saying to people that if you're poor, you're worthless. If you're elderly, you're worthless. If you can't afford housing because minimum wage has not actually kept up with inflation over the years, and so you may be working 2 or 3 jobs, minimum wage jobs, but you still can't put food on the table or a roof over your head, then somehow you don't get to have the assistance of the government to climb out of it. So it's a cruel budget, and while it's true that this budget is not going to pass this year because it already contradicts so dramatically the agreement that was made last week in the Senate and the House, the reality is the Trump administration is trying to put forward a proposal that, deficits are ballooned so much that now we have to cut Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. These are programs that 3/4 of Americans rely on. And so ultimately, this is saying to the wealthiest 1% and the biggest corporations, it's a love letter on Valentine's Day to those millionaires, billionaires, and wealthiest corporations. Those are the only people that are going to benefit from this budget.
So let's go through a few more of the things. For example, the cutting of food stamps instead to give boxes of food to people. The supporters are saying it's like the blue apron approach. But can you talk about what this means?
Yes, what it means is essentially, number one, privatizing that whole program. Number two, it means essentially saying to people, you don't even get to choose what you want to eat. You have to eat what comes to you in this box. And let me tell you, there is very little guarantee that these boxes are going to provide more nutritional value. They're going to be based on the private companies that support those kinds of box programs. And it's different. You know, Mick Mulvaney wanted to cut Meals on Wheels. Now later he said it didn't, you know, his last budget didn't cut Meals on Wheels. That's a program where food is delivered to seniors and the disabled because they're unable to go get the food. That's very different than saying to kids and families across the country, we're going to determine what you eat. Not to mention the amount of infrastructure that they would have to put in place in order to deliver these boxes to people is enormous. So what they do in the budget is they actually cut the actual amount that is used for the program, and they put it into administration of creating that infrastructure. So it's an even deeper cut. And if you look at education, you mentioned education in your excellent lead up to this, you know, they say it's a 10% cut to the education budget, but if you look at how much they're going to put, I think it's $1.2 or $1.5 billion into choice programs, which is essentially privatization of public education, it's an even bigger cut to education. And then you combine with that the public loan forgiveness. I mean, this is really taking away opportunity from everyone. There's one other thing I want to just quickly touch on, which is, you know, to me, this is a giant thumbing of the nose to the very people that voted for Trump in many rural districts, hoping that he was going to somehow give them opportunity. He eliminates rural wastewater monies for rural counties. He eliminates the Economic Development Association, which put millions of dollars into coal-based communities to try to transition them out. He thumbs his nose at the idea of climate change all over again and global warming, and he literally cuts all of the programs that are related to research and science. The EPA alone has a 30% cut to its budget because, you know, Trump and Mick Mulvaney are in the pockets of fossil fuel companies who are giving them millions of dollars of contributions in order to stop the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable energy economy.
I want to go back to Senator Bernie Sanders' comments on Trump's budget proposal.
I think what the American people understand is their one vote, their one voice matters relatively little in a Congress which is dominated by big money, wealthy campaign contributors. The Koch brothers are going to spend some $400 million in the coming campaign. And you know what? This budget is the budget of the Koch brothers. It is the budget of the billionaire class, and the American people understand it. This is a budget which will make it harder for our children to get a decent education, harder for working families to get the health care they desperately need, harder to protect the air that we breathe and the water we drink, and harder for the elderly to live out their retirement years with dignity and respect. This is not a budget, as candidate Donald Trump talked about, that takes on the political establishment. This is a budget of the political establishment. This is the Robin Hood principle in reverse. It is a budget that takes from the poor and gives to the very wealthy.
Pramila Jayapal, your response.
Well, I completely agree with him. Donald Trump campaigned as a populist. He is governing as a plutocrat. That's what this budget is, as I said earlier, a love letter on Valentine's Day to millionaires and billionaires. And you know what offends me so much is, what does it say about working people, some of whom gave Trump their support because they thought that he was somehow going to help their kids or help them to put food on the table or a roof over their heads or retire with dignity or give their kids more opportunity. It says, sorry, we don't care about you. And it actually assigns judgment and blame to people who may be struggling. Just going back to SNAP for a second, this is a program where on average, participants are in the program for 7 to 9 months. So to say, and they're getting, as I said, $1.40 per meal per person. This is not a situation that people try to be in order to fleece the government. And all of this is literally to support the tax cuts for the richest corporations. even if you look at his transportation infrastructure proposal, which, you know, he claimed was going to be this huge $1.5 trillion proposal, he's only investing $200 billion of federal money into that, and he's cutting almost the same amount, about $187 billion, that he's taking out of infrastructure projects. And so this is about privatizing our roads and only building where people are going to make money off of roads. It means that if you have an infrastructure project, you know, in some community where there is no profit to be made from it, it's not going to get built. And if you build those roads in certain communities where there's a profit to be made, we're literally starting a system where people will only be able to drive on roads if they have money. And it's incredibly distressing to see.
Can you say more, Congressmember Jayapal, about what he is proposing in the budget around people in public housing having jobs?
Yes, he's proposing billions of dollars of cuts, first of all, to the Department of Housing. So it's a 50% cut to HUD. But then on top of that, he's saying that if you are in public housing and you are not working, that you would not be eligible for those benefits. He is taking away billions of dollars from Section 8 vouchers. And, you know, this is a time when now too many people are paying 60% of their income in housing. He's taking away, as Bernie Sanders said, the ability for people to have any kind of shelter and heat. You know, various programs that allow people to have housing, first of all, but then also allow them to take on their utility bills, things like that. So this is, you know, every major city across the country, but also some minor cities across the country are experiencing tremendous housing shortfalls. This budget is going to ensure that there are more people homeless, that there are more people without adequate, even temporary shelter, and more people without the utilities to actually survive hard, cold winters.
Finally, Pramila Jayapal, in addition to being a Congress member, you are a longtime immigrant rights leader. Talk about what's happening in Congress now. The Senate's supposedly opening debate on DACA, what your body is doing, the House of Representatives.
The Senate is supposed to be opening debate, but as you see, very little is happening because Trump is saying that he wants 4 pillars and he's not going to sign anything without 4 pillars. There are numerous bipartisan deals on immigration that even give a significant amount on assessing the border, determining whether or not money is needed and how it's needed, in exchange for 1.8 million dreamers getting a path to citizenship. But Trump has said that he wants to end legal immigration as we know it. He wants to get rid of the diversity visas. He wants to do all kinds of things that are fundamentally changing the family-based immigration system in this country and legal immigration. So he wants to be magnanimous, but he's saying trade 1.8 million dreamers for ending the ability for 22 million immigrants to come to the United States as parents, as adult children, closest family members. So I think the Senate is grappling with whether to make it a large proposal or a narrow proposal. I think the only way it passes if it is very, very narrow. Paul Ryan has said that he's not going to bring a bill to the floor unless Trump is going to sign it, which means that he's not really interested in making a deal on DACA. And ultimately, we have to remember, it is Trump who rescinded DACA and created this crisis. And if we are not able to pass this, the lives of 800,000 dreamers, actually 1.8 million young people who may not have gotten DACA but are dreamers and would be eligible for deportation, may be deported. And so I'm feeling furious about the way that this administration has handled DACA and the unwillingness of Paul Ryan to bring a bipartisan bill. In the House, it's the Hurd-Aguilar bill that would, I think, already has 30 sponsors on each side and would actually be able to pass if they would just give us a vote on that bill in the House.
Finally, it's day 8 of the Porter scandal of the staff secretary, a very high role in the White House, very close to Trump. With CNN reporting he was going to be elevated to deputy chief of staff. Well, this is all until not information came to the White House about him beating up his two wives. One, we now have a picture, but only because a picture came out showing the black eye of one of his wives. So you have this question of what the White House knew when they knew it, including President Trump himself, and not to mention General Kelly, his chief of staff, and his speechwriter quitting. Over Sorensen, over allegations that he ran over his wife. He ran over her foot. And you have the women themselves who have accused President Trump of sexually harassing or assaulting them, saying they want Congress to investigate the president himself. Your thoughts?
Well, I've called for General Kelly to step down. I think it is outrageous that a chief of staff would allow an alleged abuser with hard evidence, not from just random sources, but from the FBI, to actually stay, that he would propose that he be promoted, that he would be given the highest, essentially, access to classified information without permanent security clearance. You know, Me Too, Amy, you know this better than anybody. Me Too was not just about the women who were abused or the men that abused them. It was also about the cover-up of all those involved, the men and the institutions that covered it up and refused to believe the women that stepped forward. That is exactly what John Kelly has done. It's not unexpected from Trump, who has these accusations of sexual assault against him. We recently found out that he paid off one woman through, well, now they're saying it's not through his campaign funds, but this is a man who has consistently shown disrespect for women. He supported a pedophile in Alabama, and he continues to show tremendous disrespect. John Kelly, in this particular case, allowed this to happen. We have sent a letter to Kelly. My colleagues Ted Lieu and Brenda Lawrence and Jamie Raskin and I sent a letter to John Kelly saying, what did you know when, and why did you keep Rob Porter? Why did you encourage him to stay? And why have you allowed this kind of disrespect to women to continue? I think John Kelly needs to go.
And the president, do you think he should be impeached?
I think, well, you know, I signed the impeachment articles that Steve Cohen, my colleague Steve Cohen from Tennessee, drafted. I have voted twice on the floor to begin the discussion on impeachment because I really believe that this president continues to be in violation of the Constitution. He now has new properties, by the way, that he's trying to hide through LLCs. Even as he said, oh, he's not going to be involved in business anymore. This president is making enormous money on the backs of Americans across the country. He's using the Oval Office for that. He's bringing tremendous disrespect. He equates white supremacists with those who are fighting white supremacy. I think he needs to go.
Pramila Jayapal, I want to thank you for being with us. Democratic Congress member from Washington State, vice-ranking member of the House Budget Committee, and vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, speaking to us from Congress. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, it's 20 years since V-Day began. Stay with us. The White House is facing an escalating scandal over how it ignored the serious accusations of former Staff Secretary Rob Porter's verbal and physical abuse against his two ex-wives. Allegations, or he punched one of them in the face. We've seen photos of her black eye. We end today's show looking at the worldwide movement called V-Day to stop violence against women and girls. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the V-Day movement, inspired by Eve Ensler's groundbreaking play, The Vagina Monologues. For more, we're joined by three guests. Christine Schuller de Schrijver, who is director of V-Day Congo, co-founder of the Director of the City of Joy. Rada Boric is a V-Day and 1 billion rising global coordinator from Croatia, and Agnes Parayo is the Kenya director for V-Day. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Christine, I saw you last night. Eve Ensler has a new play out, The Body of the World, and you spoke afterwards. Talk about the significance of this day.
Well, first of all, it's like you said, it's a 20th anniversary. And we are very happy to be here and to also show the world what V-Day has accomplished the last 20 years and how amazing the movement is, and also also with our 1 billion rising.
Mm-hmm. And Rada, you come from Croatia. Talk about what you're dealing with there, and when you hear our reports and what's happening in the White House and President Trump himself accused of sexual assault and harassment.
I think, unfortunately, what is going on here is just mirroring everywhere in what we call mainstream politics, and of course that the men, high-ranking men, including presidents or prime ministers in Europe, try to hide the violence against women committed by their own staff. And I think it's absolutely unacceptable, and especially when we talk about 20 years later of V-Day and what we accomplished in the movement, that this synergy of women from different women's groups and different women's movements that started in the 70s, but that now we have it V-Day. I think that what we should be proud, that it's most probably the biggest ever global movement. It would be this year, and it was last year, in over 200 countries, from Kosovo to Germany, or from Bangladesh to Philippines. Women workers, domestic workers, women who have been violated, women from women's workers' unions, they all are coming together with the same notion. It's really enough. It's really enough with violence.
Agnes, in Kenya, you have founded the first V-Day safe house for girls. Explain what is there.
The safe house is meant to rescue girls running away from female genital mutilation and early marriages. This is part of our culture because I come from a Maasai community where they still value their culture. And after educating these girls in the field, the girls say no to female genital mutilation. Then we came up with this idea of having a safe house where they can run to. It is a successful program because so many girls run to us. The safe house can accommodate 49 girls at a time. And we also have a reconciliation process where we reconcile these girls after they have run to the safe house. And then after a few years, after we have taken them to school, we reconcile them with their parents, and they have been accepted back in their homes.
In part two of our discussion, we're going to go more deeply into what this means and how it can be a model around the world. But I wanted to ask Christine about, we've been talking for years now, as you've come to this country for the last 10 years, as part of the V-Day movement. But in this last year, with the election of Trump, what is the awareness of President Trump in Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the message it sends?
First of all, I think that Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and he's a guy who doesn't love black people and has no respect. Because if you have no respect for women, how can you respect black people? So I don't think he's an important character, or I don't know how I can call him, because I have no respect at all for him. And we are a movement. V-Day is a movement to fight violence against women. And when we see somebody like him who has no respect at all for human beings and for women, I mean, he means nothing for us.
Are you hopeful?
And we have no expectations, from the U.S. That's why I believe in movement. And I think we have to be the change we want in DRC.
And we're going to leave this part of the conversation on movement, but we'll talk about this movement in part two, which we'll post online at democracynow.org. That does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us, and happy V-Day.